Hey everyone, and welcome to a fresh mental game podcast. Hope you're having a great summer, and hope you're enjoying the World Cup. Man, what a treat it's been. I mean, admittedly, I'm not the number one soccer fan or football fan, depending on where you're from, in the world. But I love the World Cup. Something about the national pride, the stakes, and this year, the bonus for us Americans of having so many fans from all over the world come and enjoy our country. From fans experiencing the Buc-ee's Superstore in Texas for the first time, eating pizza in New York, marching down the streets of Kansas City, the Scottish Tartan Army, drinking Boston dry. Yeah, read about this. Boston's pubs completely sold out of liquor when Scotland was playing there. And speaking of Scotland, we have the pride of Glasgow, Scotland, sport and performance psychologist Dr. Paul McCarthy on the mental game today. And Dr. McCarthy will break down something that is crucial in international tournaments like this, which is the art of the penalty shootout. They featured some really next level mental game psychology, whether it's the dance, mentally and physically, that happened between the taker and the goalkeeper, the celebrations or non-celebrations that occur, and everything that goes down inside the minds of these players as they go through the shootouts. Dr. McCarthy is a world-renowned expert on this. He's helped interpret some of the great research in this field, and we're lucky to have him on the mental game today. So if you want to illuminate a little of what you've seen in the World Cup and learn a little something or two before you watch the rest of it, I highly suggest you tune into the next 30 minutes. And without further ado, here is Dr. Paul McCarthy in 3, 2, 1. Dr. Paul McCarthy, welcome on.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
It's great to have you, and you're someone with so much expertise all across sport, specifically lots of media, lots of research that you've done in the area of penalty shootouts. So I'm sitting around like the entire world and watching some of these epic shootouts. Morocco take down the Netherlands, Paraguay take down Germany, Egypt over Australia, and I got to have an expert like you on. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, no, and it's a pleasure to contribute. And really, I'm taking the research that other researchers have done and putting it into my own work and into my private practice. So I'm leaning really or standing on the shoulders of the other giants to make a contribution.
We all stand on the shoulders of giants. So we're really just two guys right now standing on shoulders talking about football / soccer because I have to address both your audience and mine. So Dr. McCarthy, I just want to start generally. As we watch the World Cup, what's the number one thing fans watching shootouts don't notice that they should?
There are probably quite a few things, and a lot of questions that come up in the media are, and I guess from fans in general, will be things like who should start in terms of the first kicker. Is it more advantageous for one team to go ahead of another? What does it mean if you are position 3 or position 4 in the shootout? So lots of things they're asking questions about, and people will have their own ideas, and perhaps understanding the penalty shootout as a lottery that anybody could win it. But that's not necessarily true. It's a little bit more strategic than that.
So you break it down into a lot of ways and the strategy. Something I'm really intrigued by is the backpack analogy, sort of pressure compounding. How could you explain that?
Yeah, and one of the things in terms of the first penalty is usually stressful, but less stressful than penalty 4 or penalty number 5, simply because there are more at stake at that stage of the penalty shootout. And the way we described it was that, somebody's got a backpack on, but when they come back and the next player goes down, there's an extra weight put into it. When that player comes back, and depending on the outcome, there's an extra weight put into it for the next person. And that's why we try to understand the psychological strain that is placed on players and the likelihood of them scoring. And we typically know that in terms of international football compared with club football, international football tends to weigh more heavily. So in terms of success rate, it drops in comparison with a lot of club football.
That's fascinating to me, and it's the number one piece of evidence that the mental game is behind so much of this. I mean, you have a super high success rate for that first shot, but if you're getting into shot number 4 and shot number 5, it just plummets and plummets and plummets. And that's, like you say, because pressure is mounting, mounting, mounting.
That's right. And the consequences are greater, and it does happen, of course, in relation to the opposition and their success rate. So we always take that into account, that penalty taking and penalty takers in a shootout are competing against the quality and standard. So somebody might win a penalty shootout with scoring 3 goals and the opposition scoring 2. It doesn't mean that somebody scored 5 and the other scored 4 and so on, or it has to go on further than that.
And that's the interesting thing about the mental game of these shootouts to me, is you have sort of 2 battles happening at once. It's the individual taker against the individual goalkeeper. That's the one that we all see. But then there's the battle between Team A and Team B. And something you've mentioned is celebrations. And that if my team scores and we go wild, we celebrate to the max, that actually affects your team. How does it affect your team?
Yeah, and one of the ways in which it does is that in broad terms, we have social support that is a mechanism that happens in lots of areas of our lives. And social support is that we know that other people are there for us. Now, they don't necessarily have to be there for us, but we believe that they are there for us. But when that is demonstrated by a team, there is an uplift, a kind of an emotional uplift, that we are capable together, stronger. And not only that, but there is research to show that that increased closeness, that kind of, arms around each other, is a shared emotional experience of collective unity. So we feel more together because we are together, and you can see us being together. And we're being together because we have experienced a level of success. And there's also other research that looks at the challenge hypothesis, and it shows that winners against losers, the winners tend to show this spike in terms of their testosterone response compared with the losers. So it is a sharper spike, that we have been successful and we know it. And physiologically, our body is showing that change or that success as well, compared with the losers.
That's interesting. That the testosterone rises for winners compared to losers. So in the context of a penalty shootout, you're telling me testosterone rises after I score or my team scores a goal compared to the folks watching.
Yeah, I know, not that we have, or that I'm aware of, very specific research on that phenomenon, but it is a generalized phenomenon that happens in any competitive context. So following an event, the success of an outcome for a team in terms of their outcome is greater than for the losers.
So in the context of celebrations, you label this emotional contagion. And I really love that phrase, because I hear contagion a lot. I think of transmutable diseases. But to think about it in the context of emotion is really cool. Can you explain how that applies here?
Yeah. So emotional contagion is the experience of a particular emotion that is expressed by one person, is also received by others within the group. And we often see this in team contexts. And emotional contagion might be that anxiety is spreading within the group, but also the opposite. It might be the joy, excitement, fun is spreading within the group. And what we want to do is to be able to get that balance right for what our team feels it needs.
I'm curious how that applies in football celebrations, like during the World Cup. I mean, I see some, and this is not just shootouts, I see some players score and you have the celebration of a lifetime. I mean, this epic, over-the-top celebration. Some guys try to take act like you've been there before, I'm cool, kind of Mo Salah and his penalty kick against Australia, just kind of chill. What's the difference from your perspective between those two types?
Yeah, and celebrations are they're learned experiences. They are very common in sports like football, where the scores are infrequent, compared with, say, basketball. And because scores are infrequent, there is greater time taken to celebrate, and they have to come back to the center for to restart the game. But what tends to be happening there is that the celebration is a recognition of what the team have done, but it also is at the same time a level of gamesmanship to say, we've succeeded here. Now it's over to you to respond. And depending on the context, one of the early pieces of research that was done in football, it's going back quite a few years, was showing that when a team score, the likelihood of the opposition scoring in the next 5 minutes was rising exponentially, which is a really interesting phenomenon that we've just scored and now we're more vulnerable to let a score or a goal be scored against us.
Interesting to me. It's almost counterintuitive. Why is that if I score, you're then more likely to score right after?
Yeah, and there are different phenomena at play here and different mechanisms to understand, and it varies according to the score within the game as well. But often after scoring, there is a level of elation, but people are perhaps, one of the theories at least, is loss aversion. We are, as human beings, we're loss averse. We would rather not lose something rather than to gain something. And they've shown this in putting on the PGA Tour, that players are more likely to putt for par than they are to putt for birdie given the same putt. And this loss aversion seems to be characteristic, that we are trying to hold on to our position, both as a team or as individuals, in terms of the context in which we are competing in.
Is it too simplistic to take that and say we are trying not to lose more than we are to win?
Yeah, and that's kind of how we would package it, and that kind of is human. And, for teams in particular who have a collective mental model, what we're talking about, a way of seeing the game and seeing how games are played out, may collectively join on, we need to protect here rather than to advance or attack or compete. And sometimes that's a mechanism that is built into the team. Sometimes it's a mechanism that is learned through coaching and so on. And so at a broader scale, we're probably understanding more about the uniqueness of each team, depending on the experiences and group processes that they have. And we probably need to understand each team in their own natural habitat, as it were.
That just drives us fans nuts, though, right? I mean, there's
Yes.
nothing worse than watching a game or a match in any sport where both teams are just trying not to lose. It's like, come on, take a risk,
Yeah.
be aggressive.
Yeah, that's right. And when it comes to penalty shootouts, the circumstances are very simple. You're shooting to score, and the opposition keeper is trying to prevent that. So in terms of an opportunity to execute a skill under pressure, well, we see it at its greatest in international competitions. But it's actually the context in terms of what the researchers have found over the years. Like, for example, there's something known as the off-center effect. And its researchers have found that when goalkeepers stand a few centimeters off the center of the goal, penalty takers tend to shoot into the side that appears to have slightly more space, often without consciously knowing that they have done that. So that off-center effect is a really interesting phenomenon that we often see in penalty taking.
And what are the results in that off center?
Yeah, and a lot of these results are showing that that there are greater opportunities to score. It doesn't mean that we always score, because it relates to another piece of information that goalkeepers again would save more penalties if they were standing up. Apparently 23 or 26% more penalties, but because they are in a context where it is assumed that the goalkeeper will dive to one side or the other, the expectation is that they will act. And that action is good to the viewing public, but not necessarily good for saving the greatest amount of penalties.
Now, this is the most fascinating piece of research for me. So thank you for making that transition. You call it the action bias. It's sort of this fear of looking passive, right? Goalkeepers dive 93% of the time, even though studies show just standing in the center is actually better. Can you break that down a little bit?
That action orientation we have as human beings is that culturally, across cultures, humans are seen to do something, to make an attempt to at least give this impression it's like a moral instinct that you're going to jump or dive or do something to save the situation. And if that were to happen, people would accept the outcome rather than somebody standing and not doing anything, a little bit like a bystander effect, where we're almost expecting somebody else to do the work for us.
That to me is so human nature, right? In anything, you look sort of like a fool if you're beaten, but you're just standing in place. However, if I dive to the right and he shoots to the left and the ball goes in, it's just sort of, oh, well, I guess wrong, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it will show you how social behavior is so influenced by the context and the people around us. So if there are 80,000 fans in a stadium, the expectation is that, and millions of fans worldwide, but the expectation is that you will do something that is expected in that context. But I think for goalkeepers, a lot of what they are trying to do, not just goalkeepers, but penalty takers, is understand the context a little bit better and maybe make more sense of how do I improve the accuracy, maybe by judgment, understanding patterns of penalty taking in the past from other players. So there's a lot more action, I guess, that is happening now in relation to penalty taking.
What do you think it would take to get more goalkeepers to stay centered? Because I understand the biases towards action and against staying in the center. But the research, as I look at it and you explain it, is pretty damning.
That's right. And part of it, I guess, is that keepers maybe are trying to adopt a taller standing position before they dive so that they're giving themselves the options. And penalty takers tend to do it in two ways. They either shoot before the keeper has a chance to save, or they wait for the keeper to dive and then they strike. And we've seen quite a few missed penalties on those occasions, especially across the World Cup, where there has been a stutter, a wait, the keeper hasn't dived, and then the player is forced to kick. So we have a lot going on there in terms of what is happening between the player and the goalkeeper.
When you watch a shootout, what are you looking for in those maybe 10 seconds between when the ball is placed and when the ball is kicked? There is so much there.
There is. Like, one of the first things we know, and I know it related to England's goal or penalty taking, was that they had the shortest time from when the whistle was blown to striking. So they had the shortest time, in fact, of any of the other teams that they were compared against. So even taking more time to prepare themselves after the whistle is blown to shoot was going to be a benefit to them. And further up the table on that kind of league table of better outcomes were teams like Germany, who had characteristically done well in penalty taking competitions previously. Now, a lot of what's going on there as well is related to what is it the goalkeeper can do to affect the player and what the player can do to affect the goalkeeper. And studies have shown that anxiety increases our attention towards the goalkeeper. So if we're shooting, so that visual focus leads shots to be struck more centrally and therefore easier to stop by the keeper. So penalty takers using an independent, or a keeper independent strategy. So I mean, picking a corner, generally show greater accuracy.
Take your time and go with the keeper independent strategy. So it's sort of, you can either depend on the keeper or you can just ignore him completely.
That's right, yeah. And ideally you have made your decision long before you've stepped up to take the penalty. And then you're going with what you have decided.
So when I watch some of these matches, and I'm talking World Cup because, of course, that's happening right now as we record in early July. I sit around and I watch them. sometimes with friends, and they make comments like, "How could he miss so badly? He's a professional soccer player."
Yeah,
You know, think of Germany, right, against
yeah,
Paraguay. They had some brutal misses in
yeah,
that shootout. I mean, these are some of the best players on the planet. What do
yeah.
you see when you see some of those misses that are not just misses, but are sailing feet above the net?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things to look at. And the first is that pressure tends to change where people look. And so under pressure, performers experience disruptions in their attentional control. And we know from eye tracking studies, anxious players tend to spend more time looking at the goalkeeper and less time looking at their intended target, which results in lower accuracy. But also, it's important to remember as well that goalkeepers are under less pressure than the kickers. And so, if we said psychologically it's asymmetric, the favor lies with the keeper in the sense that scoring is expected, while saving is the exception. That's the way people look at penalties. But research consistently finds that the burden of responsibility falls mainly on the shooter, and that missing can transform a player again from the hero to the villain, or, and in seconds. We might expect that the player is going to shoot and score and shoots and doesn't score.
I'm also intrigued by the self-fulfilling prophecies of nations. You already mentioned England, how that was a big, hey, we got to take more time. Spain
That's
is a
right.
country that's improved quite a bit. Germany is a country that historically has been epically great at shootouts, but of course
Yeah.
bombed out against Paraguay. What do you learn from these self-fulfilling prophecies of nations or even clubs?
The first thing to say is that players in any national team are not responsible for their history, their nation's
Right.
history. So they are independent of that. But that collective understanding of what has happened in the past does play its part. And we do know as well that players perform better when they control their own decisions. So if they take themselves independently away from that setting, we can understand a little bit more about what's going on. And we know that research with elite youth players allowed to choose their own target locations, they tend to score more goals under pressure than those who were shooting because a target was provided for them externally. And what that means is that, intentionality and autonomy really matter in penalty shootouts.
What do you mean by that? Autonomy matters.
Yeah, so autonomy is about our choice. So having a choice about where we are going to strike the penalty, into what corner, the mechanism that works for us is our choice, rather than too much external information coming to us about this is the right side of the goal to shoot, because the keeper typically dives in this direction. So what we have is a lot of collective data of about keepers and about shooters. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting is that goalkeepers, they frequently dive too early. And, so elite penalties, our penalty takers, goalkeepers almost always dive left or right, even though remaining in the centre, like we were saying earlier, would be statistically advantageous. So with that action bias in mind, penalty takers may well be aware that the goalkeeper is likely to dive. So they have that advanced information already, which again, it may not be a huge piece of information in their favor, but at least they know that this is a likelihood.
That really goes into practicing and training
Yeah,
for this. I mean, you've been
correct.
critical of some teams sort of treat it like you say a spare tire. It's not a
Yeah.
spare tire. It's a very important part of practice. How does this all work into the way a team prepares for a match?
And there's a lot more that can be practiced, and not, of course, they talk about simulating conditions, and nothing is going to prepare you for what it's like, and that's true, of course. But in terms of inoculating you against the stress, there are lots of things that people can do. Um, you know, in terms of what the keeper is doing or the player, but to be able to maybe delay the kick in some way. So for as if we were thinking about a goalkeeper might delay the kick It might gesture, stare, move about. Anything that distracts the shooter may increase the kicker's cognitive load and anxiety because they're interfering with the routines that they have put together for successful execution. So, as much as the players are practicing their routines, they also have to be able to adapt to what the keeper might be doing. Maybe not standing on their line or moving before or they're waiting or delaying the referee from blowing the whistle to be able to take the penalty.
So we got still a few more weeks left of the World Cup. Odds are there's going to be another penalty shootout. Tell me something that you suggest casual fans look at or scrutinize a little more than just the very basic surface level that we're kind of used to watching.
Yeah, I guess the first thing is that analyses of major tournament shootouts have repeatedly found that the teams kicking first win more often than teams kicking second. So although that's again on a coin toss of which side and who kicks first, that does have value because the second team tend to be faced with I must score here if the first team have scored. They've scored, I must score, and that's often where it is located. I think the other thing is the walk from the halfway line is psychologically important as well, because during that walk from the centre circle, you can see a lot of the behaviours. You can watch the face and the body, so facial expression and what we would typically call body language, and part of that might be down to structured routines or controlled breathing or a particular way of preparing. These are kind of things that would be worth looking out for. But I think one thing that's really interesting is that some of the research has shown that the placed foot, so the standing foot of the kicker, if you were to draw a line between the heel and toe and project that outwards, that standing foot is usually pointing in the direction that the shooter is going to shoot for. And although players know this, they do try to disguise it. But that non-kicking foot is usually, and it is a very strong predictor, and the foot often points roughly in the direction of the intended target. So what the keepers are doing, and they are doing it by perception, they may not necessarily know that, but their expertise is drawing their eyes and their awareness towards that planted foot, the hip angle, shoulder alignment, and the approach angle. Because the keepers have expertise, they are taking this advanced information as a mechanism for understanding what might these cues be telling me about the likelihood of where this penalty is about to go.
It's going to be so interesting to watch this all develop for the next 5, 10, 30 years because analytics, technology, the training, everything is going to get smarter. I mean, I could see AI hacking away to win a penalty shootout, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I guess what's interesting about it all really is that pressure, expectations, the fear of consequences, they strongly affect the conversion rates in kicks. And we know that it's greater in international competitions compared with club. So this strain that people are under is understandable, but it also recognizes how much more we need to be able to address both the mechanisms, the preparation, the responses to the players, and know more about what is helping the player to shoot better, but also, I guess, helping the goalkeeper to make more saves on the other side.
And that's why it's such a beautiful thing, because on the surface, it's so simple, right? It's just one man or woman in front of the ball and a man or woman getting ready to save it in front of the net. But beneath the surface, sort of like a duck floating on water, I mean, they're paddling their legs, right? There's a lot happening. And Dr. McCarthy, I appreciate you so much for helping us break it down, learn what really is going on with the mental game of these penalty shootouts.
No, that's been a pleasure. And there's lots of research completed, and I guess an awful lot more to be done as well in the years ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, I look forward to having you on, hopefully sometime in the future, to break down the next steps and the next learnings, because I know they're all right around the corner. So thank you, Dr. McCarthy, for joining the mental game.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And back in the studio, a big thanks to Dr. McCarthy for joining the mental game. And I hope, fingers, toes, and everything crossed, that we get more entertaining penalty shootouts for the rest of this World Cup. So I hope you've learned a little something. I know I've learned a ton from Dr. McCarthy. Tons of great mental game episodes to catch up on from the summer and this spring. Rustin Dodd of The Athletic, Olympic silver medalist Ryan Cochran-Siegel, some international flag football superstars, and a whole lot more. So thank you for your time. Thank you for rating, subscribing, reviewing. All of it helps quite a bit. I hope you take care of yourself, take care of others, be kind, and I'll talk to you next time on The Mental Game. Have a great one.